My name is Rachel Palmer. I'm 37, and just last week, I attended a professional gala where I was being honored for my work in research and education. It was a night I'd been anticipating for weeks, a celebration of everything I'd built over the years. But as fate would have it, the moment I stepped into the restroom to take a breather, I came face to face with someone I hadn't seen in nearly 15 years. My mother. She was at the sink, reapplying her lipstick, looking every bit the part of the wealthy socialite she'd always been. For a moment, I thought maybe she wouldn't recognize me, but then her eyes flicked up to the mirror and landed on my reflection. Her hand froze mid-motion, and I saw her jaw tighten. "Rachel," she said, her voice cool and detached, like we'd just bumped into each other at a country club instead of a bathroom after 15 years of silence. "I didn't expect to see you here." I steadied myself, gripping the edge of my clutch. "I could say the same," I replied, keeping my tone even. "What brings you here?" She turned to face me, her posture as rigid as ever. "Your father and I were invited, of course. We've always been involved with organizations that support education. And you?" "I'm being honored tonight," I said, meeting her gaze. "For my work and research." Her expression barely shifted, but I caught the faintest flicker of surprise in her eyes before she masked it. "I see," she said, turning back to the mirror. "Well, I suppose everyone finds their way eventually." Her words brought me back to the day I walked out of that house for the last time. I was 19, and the years leading up to that moment hadn't been easy. In high school, I struggled with depression, but in my family, that wasn't something you admitted. "What could you possibly be sad about?" my mother had said once, her voice dripping with irritation when I tried to open up to her. "You have everything, more than most kids your age. You're just making excuses." The truth was, I'd been drowning. The pressure to be perfect, to live up to the Palmer name, was suffocating. I tried to keep up, but my grades started slipping during my junior year, and by senior year, I was barely holding on. My parents didn't see a kid who needed help. They saw a failure, an embarrassment. When I only got into a community college, my father's fury was unmatched. "This family has standards," he had said that night, pacing the living room while I stood there clutching my acceptance letter. "And you've done nothing but drag us down. You want to waste your life? Fine. But you'll do it on your own." I had been kicked out of the house. I remember the weight of that duffel bag as I left the house that night. It wasn't just filled with clothes. It held the reality of being completely on my own. My parents didn't even come to the door to say goodbye. My mother stayed seated on the couch, scrolling through her phone as if I didn't exist. My father had disappeared into his study after delivering his ultimatum. I felt invisible, discarded, like I'd never been a part of their world to begin with. For the first few weeks, I stayed with a friend, sleeping on her pull-out couch while I tried to figure out my next steps. Community college wasn't glamorous, but it felt like the only thing I could control. I worked part-time at a diner to cover tuition and rent when I finally scraped together enough to move into a tiny studio apartment. It was a grind, balancing classes, work, and the overwhelming sense of failure that clung to me like a second skin. But something about being on my own, away from their constant judgment, gave me a flicker of hope. For the first time, I could breathe, even if the air felt thin. My first year at community college was a blur of late-night study sessions and endless shifts at the diner. I'd decided to study chemistry, partly because I genuinely enjoyed it, and partly because I wanted to prove to myself, and maybe even to them, that I could excel in something challenging. It wasn't easy. My high school grades had been mediocre at best, and I felt like I was starting from behind compared to my classmates. But for the first time in years, I wasn't under the crushing weight of their expectations. I could just focus on learning. I still remember my first chemistry exam. I'd spent weeks preparing, going over every formula, every reaction, until I could practically recite them in my sleep. When the professor handed back the graded tests, I was terrified to look. But there it was, a 92%. I nearly cried, right there in the middle of the classroom. It wasn't perfect, but it was mine. I'd earned it. It felt like the first small step toward rebuilding myself after everything had fallen apart. Over the years, I evolved in ways I never expected. College wasn't easy, but I had learned how to work for what I wanted, and the more I gave, the more I saw myself grow. By the time I finished my associate's degree, I wasn't just a student anymore. I was someone who had learned how to fight for her place in the world. I transferred to a 4-year university, and while I still faced obstacles, I had learned how to push through them. The shy, insecure girl who barely got by in high school had become someone who could stand in front of a class, explain complex concepts, and hold her own. Chemistry, once a challenge, became my passion. I didn't just want to pass anymore. I wanted to excel, to prove that I wasn't the failure they thought I was. I worked part-time, still, but I also started interning at local research labs, gaining experience that eventually led me to an opportunity I never imagined, becoming a lead researcher at a nonprofit focused on advancing science education. It wasn't just a job. It was my way of giving back, of creating a space where other kids, the ones who were told they weren't good enough, could find their way too. Graduating with my bachelor's degree was supposed to be a moment of triumph, but when it came time to celebrate, I realized something. My parents hadn't even called. Not to congratulate me, not to ask about my plans. Nothing. My father, the owner of a massive fertilizer company, had more money than he knew what to do with. He and my mother lived in a mansion, threw extravagant parties, and rubbed elbows with politicians and CEOs. But for all their wealth, they'd never taken an interest in me unless it was to criticize. Even after I graduated with honors, after I'd worked my ass off to get where I was, I didn't exist in their world. I was a reminder of their failure, an inconvenient blemish on their perfect lives. It stung more than I wanted to admit. I had hoped, maybe foolishly, that they'd at least acknowledge the hard work I'd put in. But they didn't. It was as if I never mattered to them, and that realization hit harder than I cared to admit. The only family member who bothered to show up at my graduation ceremony was Aunt Lydia. She was my mother's younger sister, the black sheep of the family. Lydia had never cared much for my parents' rigid standards, and while they shunned her for being too eccentric, she was always kind to me. She was the one person who would call on my birthday, even when my parents pretended I didn't exist. When I saw her in the crowd, I felt a lump form in my throat. She waved at me excitedly from the back, and after the ceremony, I found her in the parking lot, waiting with a huge bouquet of flowers. "You did it, kid," she said, pulling me into a tight hug. "I'm so proud of you." It was a small comfort, but it was something. It wasn't the cold silence I'd gotten from my parents. Aunt Lydia was the one who reminded me that family didn't have to mean perfection, that love could come from unexpected places. She didn't care that I hadn't followed the straight path they wanted for me. She cared that I had made it on my own, no matter the hurdles. A few months after graduation, I was wrapping up a research project at the university when one of my professors, Dr. Collins, pulled me aside. He was an old-school chemist, the kind who had a passion for the periodic table like it was a work of art. He'd noticed my work ethic, my persistence despite everything I'd been through. "Rachel," he said, his voice low and thoughtful, "I've been in touch with some colleagues at Oxford University. They're offering a research opportunity in environmental chemistry, and I think you'd be a perfect fit." At first I thought it was a joke. Oxford? One of the most prestigious universities in the world? Me? But Dr. Collins insisted. He told me that this wasn't just a job, it was a chance to make real contributions to the field, and that I deserved the opportunity. "Don't let fear hold you back, Rachel," he said. "You've proven yourself. Now it's time to take that next step." I applied, hesitantly at first, not fully believing it could happen. The application process was rigorous, and I wasn't sure I'd make the cut. But then, weeks later, I received an email. We are pleased to inform you that you've been awarded a research grant for your proposed work in environmental chemistry at Oxford University. I moved to England without telling anyone. Not my parents, not any of my old friends. The only person who knew was Aunt Lydia. I called her a few days before I left, and she was the one who encouraged me to go. You've worked too hard to let anything hold you back, she said. Do this for yourself, Rachel. She understood why I needed to disappear, why I needed to escape the shadows of my past and carve out a new future without anyone's expectations hanging over me. I asked Lydia not to tell anyone else where I'd gone. I didn't want them to try and find me, didn't want the weight of their judgment pulling me back. So, I left, boarding a plane to Oxford, with nothing but a backpack, and the faint hope that this could be my chance to finally become the person I always dreamed of being. I settled into a small flat in Oxford and threw myself into my work. The first few weeks were tough, the language, the culture, the isolation. But the more I immersed myself in my research, the more I felt at home. I was working on projects that mattered, things that could make a real impact on the world. The chemistry I studied was no longer just about passing exams or proving myself to my parents. It was about changing the future. As the years passed, I completed my master's degree, and then, driven by the momentum of my research, I applied for a PhD. The process was grueling, but I was determined. I had found my place at Oxford, and there was no turning back. After several years of sleepless nights and endless lab experiments, I earned my PhD, becoming a respected researcher in the field of environmental chemistry. After finishing my PhD, the next step seemed almost too surreal to grasp. I was offered a position as a professor at the University of Cambridge. It felt like a dream I never dared to chase, not because I didn't think I deserved it, but because I never imagined I would be given the chance. I had worked so hard to get to this point, and yet, the recognition still felt like it was happening to someone else. At Cambridge, I was able to teach and mentor the next generation of students, something I hadn't expected to find so fulfilling. The freedom to shape minds, to pass on the knowledge and passion I'd gained, was beyond anything I could have imagined back when I was struggling through community college. I had gone from being the girl who didn't belong to someone who could stand at the front of a classroom and be taken seriously. But there was still a piece of me that was always looking over my shoulder, wondering if anyone back home knew where I was, if anyone cared enough to find out. I hadn't heard from my parents since I left. No calls, no letters, no attempts to reach out. I wondered if they even thought about me. As my mother turned back to the mirror, adjusting her lipstick, I felt a familiar weight settle in my chest. Her words, "Everyone finds their way eventually," echoed in my head, and I couldn't help but wonder if she really believed it. I thought about all those years I spent trying to meet their expectations, all the ways they told me I wasn't good enough. The community college rejection, the years of silence, and the way they acted like I didn't exist once I walked out of their house. It felt like a lifetime ago, but standing there in that bathroom, the bitterness still stung. I had worked so hard to get to this point, leaving everything behind, moving to England, finishing my master's and PhD, becoming a professor at Cambridge. And yet, there she was, standing in front of me, acting like my entire journey had been some kind of afterthought. I had gone from being the failure they cast aside to someone who could now speak at international conferences, lead research, and mentor young minds. And for what? To stand here and have her offer me nothing more than a cold acknowledgement? As she left the bathroom, I watched her glide out of the door, back to the people she was comfortable with. I thought about the woman I had become, the woman who'd erased every trace of them from my life. I didn't need their approval anymore. I'd built a life on my own terms, and even though they would never understand, that was enough. The gala ceremony began shortly after my mother disappeared into the crowd. I took a deep breath, trying to shake off the weight of that encounter. The clinking of glasses, the hum of polite conversation. It all felt distant now. It was time to take my place, to step into the role I had fought so hard to claim. The stage was set, the lights shining down on the sea of well-dressed guests, and the moment I had been anticipating for months was finally here. I made my way to the front, where they called my name, the words echoing through the room. Rachel Palmer, honored for her groundbreaking contributions to education and sustainable chemistry. The applause was deafening, but it felt strangely hollow, like I was listening to someone else's life unfold. I took the stage, trying to maintain a calm exterior, but inside, all I could think about was the fact that I was standing in front of an audience of people who knew nothing of the path I had taken to get here. No idea what it had cost me to get this far. The spotlight hit me, and I could feel my heart racing in my chest. This wasn't just a recognition of my work in chemistry. This was my way of showing the world that I was more than the person my parents had tried to make me believe I was. This was the moment where I stood on my own 2 feet, with nothing to prove to anyone but myself. As I stood there, still trying to absorb the magnitude of the moment, the host's voice rang out, drawing everyone's attention. And now, ladies and gentlemen, we have an exciting announcement. In recognition of the groundbreaking work in education and sustainable chemistry that will be honored tonight, a generous and anonymous donor has pledged a grant of $2 million to the recipient of this award. The room went quiet, and I felt every pair of eyes in the room shift toward me. My heart raced. This extraordinary contribution is intended to support the continued efforts of the recipient's research and further their impact on the world of education. I blinked, momentarily stunned. $2 million. The number hung in the air, surreal and overwhelming. But the announcement wasn't directly for me. It was for the recipient of the award, someone whose name hadn't been revealed yet. I was still processing everything when I heard the host's voice continue. This grant, though anonymous, will be bestowed upon the person tonight who has demonstrated exceptional dedication to their work in advancing chemistry and education. For a moment, I didn't know what to think. The enormity of the sum, the way it would change someone's life, was astounding. But there was something else in the air, something I couldn't shake. The realization that the donor didn't know it would be me. They didn't know I was the one being honored tonight. As the announcement echoed through the room, my eyes wandered across the crowd, trying to catch a glimpse of the people around me. But then, something caught my attention. A subtle shift in the crowd. Near the back, just beside the exit, I saw him. My father. He stood up abruptly, his face twisted in disgust. His eyes met mine for a brief moment, before he turned sharply and began to make his way toward the door. His movements were swift and deliberate, as if he couldn't get out of that room fast enough. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. The man who had rejected me all those years ago, the one who had kicked me out of his house, was leaving as soon as he heard the news of the grant. He didn't even stay to see who was being recognized for the award. My chest tightened as a mix of emotions washed over me: anger, disbelief, and something darker, more bitter. This was the moment I had been waiting for. A moment where everything I had worked for was finally being acknowledged, and he couldn't even bring himself to stay in the room to witness it. He couldn't stomach the fact that the daughter he had written off was now standing at the front of the room, receiving everything he had always expected from someone else. As my father made his way toward the exit, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The strange weight of his sudden departure settled over me, but before I could process it, the announcer's voice sliced through the room again. "Ladies and gentlemen," the host continued, "we are incredibly fortunate to not only have a generous donor for tonight's award, but also a longtime supporter of education and sustainable chemistry. The $2 million grant which will be awarded to the recipient of this honor, has been made possible through the contributions of Mosaic Fertilizers, a company led by one of the most influential figures in the fertilizer industry. Mosaic Fertilizers. My father's company. I froze. The donor, the one whose generosity had made this award possible, was my father's company. My chest tightened as the truth hit me. The man who had spent years treating me like an embarrassment, the one who had walked out of the room when he learned of my success, was the one funding this recognition. The irony stung deeply. The same man who rejected my path, who disowned me for pursuing a life that didn't fit into his perfect image, had unknowingly backed the very award that would be the crowning achievement of my career. It was almost too much to process, too much to bear in that moment. I stood there stunned as the announcer's words continued to echo in my ears. The applause around me felt distant, like I was hearing it from underwater. The weight of the grant, of everything that had just been revealed, hung heavily on me. My heart pounded in my chest, and for a brief moment I couldn't process any of it. "Thank you," I managed to say into the microphone, my voice shaky but steady enough. The words felt hollow, too small for what I was feeling, but I didn't have time to think about it. I had to get out of that room. I couldn't stand there another second, basking in the recognition that felt so empty. I turned abruptly, walked off the stage, and without another glance at the audience, I bolted for the back door. My steps quickened as I made my way through the hallway, heart racing, only one thought running through my mind. My father. I knew he'd left the room. I saw him walk out, his face a mixture of disgust and something else I couldn't quite read. But he couldn't just leave, not like this, not when everything had come full circle. I couldn't let it end like this, with him walking out on the one moment that proved everything he had tried to dismiss about me. I pushed through the door leading outside, scanning the area, my breath coming in quick bursts. There he was, standing by his car, his back to me. My feet moved on their own, and before I could stop myself, I was running. "Dad!" I called out, my voice almost cracking as I rushed after him. He didn't look back at first, his shoulders stiff, but when he finally turned around, I saw the bitter expression on his face. He had that same look I remembered from all those years ago, like everything was an insult to him. "What is it now, Rachel?" he asked sharply, his voice colder than I'd ever heard it. "You think I'm going to congratulate you?" I stopped just a few feet away, my heart hammering in my chest. I knew what this was about. He had no idea who the recipient of the grant was until they called my name. Until that moment, he thought he was just funding some good cause, sending money to the foundation, believing it was going to some worthy academic or researcher he could proudly point to. He didn't know it would be me standing there on that stage. He sneered, his lips curling into a bitter smile. I don't know whether to be disgusted or impressed, but here you are, taking my money. I'm sure that's exactly what you wanted, right? I could see the resentment in his eyes. The grant, $2 million, had come from Mosaic Fertilizers, his company. But once the money was donated to the foundation, it was entirely out of his control. They had chosen who would receive it, and they chose me. The irony hit me like a wave. "I didn't ask for this," I said, keeping my voice steady despite the rush of emotions. "I never asked for your money or your approval. I earned this on my own, just like everything else." His eyes darkened and he shook his head. "It doesn't change anything. You're still the failure I kicked out of my house all those years ago. No grant or award is going to change that." I felt a rush of anger, but I pushed it down. It doesn't matter what you think anymore. I've made my own life. And if that money came from you, it doesn't mean anything to me. I turned my back on him without saying another word, my heart pounding in my chest. I didn't need to argue with him anymore. He wouldn't understand, and truthfully, I didn't need his approval. I had spent so many years trying to prove myself to him. And for what? To be here, at this moment, with everything I had worked for, only for him to stand there bitter and resentful of my success? It wasn't worth my time. The next day, I made a decision. I had spent the night thinking about what the $2 million grant meant. At first, it had felt like a victory, a vindication, but by morning, that feeling had faded. It wasn't my victory. It was just another reminder of everything I had escaped. The money, tied to his company, was never going to erase the years of pain and rejection. It wasn't going to heal the part of me that he had broken when he kicked me out of the house all those years ago. So, I donated the entire sum, every last cent of it. I didn't want it. Not from him, not with the strings that came attached to it. Instead, I directed it toward funding scholarships for underprivileged students who had been overlooked, underestimated, and written off. I wanted to give them the chance to build something for themselves, without being crushed under the weight of expectations that didn't belong to them. The money that had once been tied to rejection and bitterness was now part of something greater, something that would outlast the sting of my father's judgment. I felt a quiet satisfaction as I pressed the donation button. For the first time, I realized that I didn't need his money, his approval, or his recognition. I had built my own legacy, one that would live on far beyond the walls of that gala.
You, with your unimpressive demeanor, don't deserve the drinks in this bar. Just the perfect timing. It's raining outside. Why don't you go drink some rainwater? That suits you better. After being laid off, I was dragging around a heavy heart. At the bar, I bumped into my obnoxious former boss, who snatched my seat. But then, an unexpected person appeared, and the situation took a dramatic turn. My name is Michael. I'm 59 years old and work at a small toy company called Colorado Toys. I can't say I'm great at socializing. I've always been rather poor at it. However, I always tried to be as polite as possible to my colleagues and superiors, and I even developed a hit product. But my accomplishments were usurped by my colleague Kevin, preventing my advancement. Kevin was really good at showing himself in a positive light. He would dump troublesome tasks on others, yet talk as if he had struggled through them himself. My inability to articulate well didn't help my standing with the bosses. I couldn't liven up the mood at drinking parties, and even got scolded for not speaking up more. Kevin climbed the ladder successfully and became my boss. He looked down on me. Completely useless old men who stay at the bottom are just a waste. We don't need men who can't advance, he would say. It was normal for him to spew such insults. You live alone, right? You must be bored at home. You should work overtime and contribute a bit more to the company. He would often force me to do overtime. Though it's painful to admit, Kevin was right in a way. When I go home, there's no one there, and I have nothing to do. I used to live with my wife and child. My wife was an amazing woman, too good for me, always smiling and devoted to housework and child rearing. When our son Jason was born, our home became livelier. Jason loved music from a young age and started piano lessons. The sound of the piano became a daily occurrence in our house. He also loved playing with the toys I made. Seeing my son play with my creations made me feel my job was worthwhile. Even if work didn't go well, as long as my family was happy, that was enough for me. But those peaceful days didn't last long. When I was still 30, my wife passed away due to illness. Left behind, I was in a daze of grief. I was at a loss on how to live after losing my wife, but I had Jason. I couldn't afford to be dumb forever, so began my days of focusing on home life. Embarrassingly, I had left most of the housework and child rearing to my wife, so at first, I struggled a lot. My cooking was always burnt, and Jason would complain it was awful. But what was more challenging was taking care of Jason. About a month after my wife passed, he began to frequently throw tantrums, saying, "I want Mom. Let me see Mom." I felt the same way about wanting to see my wife. Holding Jason tightly with a heavy heart, I managed to say, "I'll do my best for both me and Mom." What would someone eloquent say in such a situation? I resented my own lack of eloquence. It was tough at first, but as time went on, I gradually got used to the household chores and became more efficient at them. As Jason grew up, he seemed to understand our family situation and started to help me out, which was a great relief. As he entered his teenage years, our conversations decreased, but he continued to help with the chores. Furthermore, on his 21st birthday, Jason said, "Thanks for raising me all these years." I was deeply moved by this and couldn't help but cry. It's a great relief to see him grow up into such a kind person. Jason moved out when he graduated from college to live on his own. I was happy to see him become independent, but the loneliness outweighed my happiness. Living in an empty house turned out to be lonelier than I had imagined. Before I knew it, I had aged and suddenly found myself at 59. One day, when I went to work, Kevin approached me with a smug grin. I had a bad feeling about it. The first thing he said was shocking. "You're fired." I was stunned by the suddenness of it. My mind went blank. "May I ask why?" I asked with a trembling voice. Kevin continued almost gleefully. "Did you forget I mentioned a while ago about downsizing due to poor performance? You're a 59-year-old low-level employee. It's not a big deal if you're let go. Just so you know, this was a decision from the top. Don't blame me. I thought the downsizing was supposed to focus on those with poor work attitudes." Though I found it unfair, I couldn't argue. I hadn't caused any trouble, but on the surface, I hadn't achieved anything notable either. I quickly resigned myself to the fact that being fired was inevitable. Seeing me downcast, Kevin looked even more amused. "Enjoy the little time you have left in your working life. Goodbye." Watching Kevin walk away triumphantly, I was convinced that my life was now on a downward slope. I had to tell Jason about being fired. It was hard to say, but I couldn't keep it from him forever. When I called him somewhat apprehensively, Jason's reaction was surprisingly gentle. "Dad, you've done enough. Now you can relax as much as you want." I was grateful to my son, who didn't blame me but instead comforted me. However, life after retirement was different than I imagined. Initially, I felt at ease without Kevin's harassment, but I soon found myself aimlessly drifting through each day. Unfulfilled, watching TV didn't really lift my spirits. I had thought work was tough because of Kevin, but after leaving, I realized I had taken pride in developing toys. Imagining the joy of children playing with the toys I created was enjoyable. Unable to find new sources of pleasure, I became increasingly despondent. 6 months after retirement, I started to lose sight of what I was living for. Sometimes I would murmur to my wife's portrait, "What should I do now?" While pondering this, I happened to see a feature on must-visit scenic spots. It's not that I had any particular interest. I just tuned in because I had nothing else to do. While watching aimlessly, a beautiful waterfall caught my eye. It was located in a forest and had recently become popular as a power spot. The waterfall was so beautiful it felt like it cleansed my soul, and I found myself mesmerized by it. I realized that I had been living in the hustle and bustle of the city for so long without ever really connecting with nature. To change my mood, I decided to actually visit the place. It had been a while since I had felt the urge to do something on my own. Leaving my recent glue behind, I quickly prepared for the trip. Before I knew it, the day of the trip arrived. I arrived at my destination without hesitation and stepped into the forest. The air was crisp and refreshing. The greenery of the trees was beautiful. Although the waterfall was still ahead, I knew coming here was the right choice. After about an hour of walking, the scenery opened up, and the waterfall appeared. It was even more beautiful and impressive than in the videos. Just watching the water cascade down was soothing to my soul. I could understand why it was called a power spot. It was a weekday, so there were few people around. As I was thinking of finding a spot to sit and enjoy the view, I noticed a woman sitting next to a large tree. She looked to be in her 20s. Her shoe was off, and she was looking at her foot. Her foot was swollen, and her beautiful face seemed to be in pain. I instinctively called out to her, "Are you okay?" Startled by a stranger suddenly speaking to her, she forced a smile. "Yes, I'm fine. It's just..." Her foot was clearly swollen, and it didn't look good at all. It would take an hour to walk out of the forest. Going back alone seemed difficult. "Excuse me, I have time, and if you don't mind, I can drive you to a hospital. I came to the entrance of this forest by rental car, so I can give you a lift. Please don't push yourself." The woman hesitated, but I assured her, please don't feel obliged. Eventually, she relented and said, please, I would appreciate that. I twisted my ankle walking in the forest. I didn't want to return without seeing the waterfall, so I pushed myself, but it got worse. I supported her out of the forest and drove to the hospital in my rental car. The doctor said, it's not serious, but you need to rest for a while. Afterward, I took her to the hotel where she was staying. Her name was Emily, and she loved traveling. Emily told me about the various tourist places she had visited. She was a great storyteller, and listening to her made me want to visit those places. Surprisingly for me, the conversation flowed smoothly, even though it was our first meeting. We continued chatting even after arriving at her hotel room. I didn't have any other plans besides seeing the waterfall, and Emily, unable to go out due to her injury, wanted me to stay and keep her company. During our conversation, I learned that Emily lived in the same town as me and even knew about my former workplace. It's surprising how well she knew about such a small company. Eventually, the topic changed, and she asked, why did you come here, Michael? After some hesitation and wondering where to start, I ended up telling her everything from the beginning. Well, actually, I got fired from my job. Despite it not being the kind of story you typically share with someone you just met, Emily listened to it all. It turned out that she had also quit her job due to exhausting office relationships and understood my situation. Her love for travel began as a way to refresh herself by visiting different places around the country. For all the hardship you faced, I'm sure good things are ahead in your life, she comforted me. Her empathy touched me deeply, and I was grateful. Despite the unexpected events, it turned out to be a heartwarming trip. After returning from the trip, I received a call from Jason. He invited me out, saying, there's a great bar I know. How about we go for a drink? It may be nosy of me, but I was worried you might have been feeling lonely. Let's go out and have a good time. I have a lot to talk about too. Nosy? Not at all. It's true that I've been living a lonely life lately. I appreciated Jason's concern. Come to think of it, it had been a long time since Jason and I had a drink together. I think the last time was on his 21st birthday. The thought of drinking with my son after so long lifted my spirits, and I quickly agreed. Unfortunately, it was pouring rain on the day of our appointment. Still, the thought of seeing Jason made the rain seem less bothersome. I took the train and arrived at the designated bar, but Jason hadn't arrived yet. He had told me it was a popular place, and indeed, most of the seats were filled. Luckily, there was one seat near the entrance that was empty, so I took it. As I was looking at the menu, the door of the bar opened. I casually glanced up and was shocked. It was Kevin who had walked in. He also noticed me and initially looked surprised, but his expression quickly turned mocking. Well, what a coincidence to see you here enjoying life after getting fired, he said, and uninvited, sat opposite me. My son is supposed to join me soon. I'm sorry, but could you please find another seat? I hesitated but protested. Kevin's eyes narrowed. Why should I care? I want to drink here too. Besides, I'm a regular at this bar. I should be given priority. I thought his demand was ridiculous, but Kevin kept pressing. Someone as dull as you doesn't deserve to drink here. It's raining, so why don't you go outside and drink rainwater? That suits you better. Kevin dismissively waved his hand, snatched the menu from me, and started looking through it. It seemed unlikely he would move just by a few words of request. Not wanting to cause a scene and disturb the bar, I decided to wait for another seat to open up. I reluctantly stood up from my seat. Noticing the concerned look from the waiter, I assured them, it's fine. I can take another seat. Just then, the door of the bar opened again. Two people entered. One was Jason, but to my surprise, the other was Emily. What a coincidence to meet here. This is amazing, I exclaimed, surprised although I was taken aback. Emily seemed as if she had anticipated this encounter. Meeting you here isn't a coincidence. Actually, Jason and I know each other and have an important matter to discuss, so we came together. I was bewildered by this sudden turn of events. The fact that Jason and Emily knew each other was surprising enough, but what could this important matter be? We'd like to talk right away, but it seems the place is full, Emily observed, looking around the bar with a disappointed expression. Then her face lit up as she spotted Kevin. Could it be that she also knew Kevin? Kevin noticed Emily staring and said, "Stop staring. It's rude." An intimidated Emily confidently approached his table and sat down without asking. "Since Kevin is here, let's discuss everything now. It's a very important matter, so I'll take a seat. Michael, please sit down too. I want you to hear this." Surprised by Emily's assertive attitude, I sat down as she instructed. "Who the hell are you, being so rude?" Kevin demanded. Emily then revealed something unexpected. "Sorry for not introducing myself earlier. I'm the daughter of the president of Colorado Toys. My name is Emily." "What?" I exclaimed in surprise. Meeting the daughter of the president of the company I used to work for by chance while traveling was an incredible stroke of luck. Kevin was visibly taken aback. Emily continued her story. "I recently met Michael. He's such a kind person, and it didn't seem right that he was fired. I asked my father why such a nice man was let go. He told me it was because he received reports of poor work performance, but I couldn't believe it. I shared with my father the story of our encounter during my travels, insisting on a proper investigation. My father agreed to look into it, seeing how earnestly I pleaded." Emily glared sharply at Kevin. It turned out that Kevin had lied about Michael's work performance, saying it was poor, negatively influencing the management's opinion of him. "What evidence do you have for that?" "It's a false accusation," Kevin protested, his face turning pale. Emily remained calm. "We obtained testimonies from Michael's former colleagues. They all unanimously said Michael was a good person. It's strange that he was fired. Those traitors." Kevin's face now turned red with anger. Emily spoke with an air of disdain. "If you must blame someone, blame yourself for your foolish actions. You will soon face the consequences. Be prepared." "What? Don't mess with me." Kevin stood up, moving aggressively towards Emily. I was about to intervene when a stern-looking waiter approached. His name tag read Manager Brian. He gave Kevin a stern look. "Sir, I'm sorry to interrupt, but could you please lower your voice? It's disturbing other customers. How dare you speak to a regular like me that way?" Despite Kevin's high-handed attitude, Brian, the manager, responded firmly in a low voice. "I'll just say it as it is, you're a troublesome customer. When you get drunk, you cause issues with other patrons, and we've received complaints asking us to deal with it. We'd rather not have a regular like you chased away." Kevin turned pale and hardly left the bar. "I thank you, Brian. Thank you so much. You really helped us out." "It's no problem at all," Brian replied with a hearty smile before returning to the back of the bar. Afterward, Jason, Emily, and I decided to have a good time together. Emily and Jason had two important things to share. The first was about Kevin's misconduct. It was pure coincidence that Kevin was at the bar, and both were as surprised as I was. The second was a delightful piece of news. Emily and Jason were in a relationship and considering marriage. Their meeting story was quite touching. Emily, after graduating from university on her own merit, had joined a major corporation. However, once her identity as the company president's daughter became known, baseless rumors spread that she had gotten the job through connections. No matter how hard she worked, she couldn't gain trust, leading to a difficult time. One day, she saw a man playing street piano at a station. It was Jason. After graduating from a music college, Jason had been working as a pianist, performing across the country. According to Emily, Jason's performance was wonderful, and just listening to it felt like a balm for her soul. She approached Jason to thank him after his performance, but she was so moved that she found herself in tears. Concerned, Jason listened to her story and suggested she travel around the country. He often traveled for work and believed unexpected encounters and discoveries enriched the heart. Upon hearing that, Emily decided to quit her job and set out on her travels. As she kept in touch with Jason during her journey, they grew closer and eventually started dating. Jason had arranged this meetup to introduce Emily and simultaneously cheer me up. Naturally, I supported their relationship and congratulated them. "Congratulations. I'm looking forward to the wedding," I said. Jason laughed. "We haven't even decided when to get married yet. You're getting ahead of yourself." But he looked pleased. The three of us then enjoyed a pleasant meal and drinks together. It seemed that Brian, the manager, had overheard our conversation, as he kindly provided us with some complimentary dishes. Thus, The enjoyable night wore on. A few days after the incident at the bar, I'd heard from Emily that Kevin had been fired. It turned out he was not only harassing others but also embezzling company funds. Apparently, his family had had enough and left him. Meanwhile, I returned to work and got involved in toy development again. My past achievements were recognized, and I was promoted. Now able to fully utilize my skills, I launched new products one after another, contributing greatly to the company's growth. Many consumers thanked me for the wonderful toys, which was incredibly gratifying. Jason and Emily were also delighted with my success. As kids, they loved the toys I developed, so their happiness meant even more to me. Recently, they celebrated their wedding. They are now enjoying a blissful married life. Influenced by Emily, I've grown quite fond of traveling, often taking trips on weekends. My personal life has finally become fulfilling, and living feels enjoyable now. There was a time when I was worried about what the future held, but now it seems life will be good. I feel like my wife in heaven is smiling down at me, reassured.
The remittance is too little. Are you mocking us? Suddenly, I was yelled at by my parents over a furious phone call. I was confused by my father's words. According to him, my sister was remitting $4,000 every month, while I was apparently mocking them by sending only 50 cents. That can't be true. I send $4,000 every month, I asserted. Huh? What are you talking about? It's your sister who sends $4,000. She's a model and earns a lot of money. Don't lie. Your sister is so capable, and you. My father grumbled. Then my mother, who took the phone from him, scolded me with an exasperated sigh. Just because you moved out, you're probably wasting money, right? Your sister is working hard and trying to make things easier for us. But you only think about yourself. You should learn from your sister who sends $4,000 every month. From a young age, my parents doted on my sister. I couldn't understand the true intention behind their words, and felt speechless with sadness. Why was it believed that I only sent 50 cents? While puzzled, I decided to stop all remittances as my parents had stated. My name is Rose. I am a 28-year-old employee at a food processing company. I have a sister, Alyssa, 5 years my junior. From childhood, Alyssa had well-defined features and looked like a doll. Her appearance was angelic, and passers-by would turn their heads to look at her. Adults would often praise her, saying how cute she was. Compared to her, I was quite plain, so the adults would chuckle and say, "Rose is just so ordinary." Moreover, my parents adored the cute Alyssa, hoping to make her a model or celebrity in the future. The difference in how my parents treated Alyssa and me has been clear since I was conscious. As a child, I wore hand-me-downs that were worn out, while Alyssa always received new clothes. Alyssa was allowed to take any lessons she wanted, while I couldn't even attend cram school. Alyssa, raised as the darling of the family, became increasingly selfish. Rose's things are my things. My things are also my things, she would say, and took all the stationery I liked. Whenever I said something, my parents invariably dismissed me, saying, "Rose, you're the older sister, so be patient." I was fed up with Alyssa's cunning ways, and our parents never scolded her. I was hurt by our parents' blatant attitudes, but resigned myself to it. As I approached upper elementary school, Alyssa started demanding her own room. Knowing she wouldn't listen if she threw a tantrum, my parents said, "From today, Rose, you sleep in the living room. Rose, you don't need a room because you have few clothes." I reluctantly spread my mattress in the living room to sleep. My grandparents in the portraits had passed away soon after Alyssa was born, but they had adored me when I was little. My grandfather, who named me, loved Rose. And since I was born in the spring when the roses were in full bloom, he named me Rose. As a child, I remember feeling warm and comfortable on my grandfather's lap. Rose, even if things are hard, they will eventually end. And happiness will bloom again like Rose, he used to say. I vaguely remembered such things. Even so, my parents' attitudes never changed, and I continued to live feeling out of place. My dream was to become a school nurse. And I told my parents I wanted to go to university, but they opposed it, saying, "We don't have the money, so work after high school graduation. You don't need education, and we still need a lot of money to take care of Alyssa. So you should cooperate for your sister." It was clearly not a situation where I could pursue further education. However, our family was not poor, just a very ordinary middle-class household. My parents were stingy with money for me because of Alyssa, so eventually, I attended a commercial high school, and Alyssa attended a prestigious women's university. After graduating from high school, I got a job at a small company and decided to move out. Ideally, I would have liked to live at home until marriage to save money. But I could see that staying at home would only continue the oppression. I rented a cheap studio apartment near my company. Living alone was more comfortable since my family home had not been a welcoming space. After graduating from university, Alyssa, who had received all my parents' hopes, lived at home and signed with a talent agency to work as a model. Apparently, she was scouted by her current agency while shopping with friends. My parents were overjoyed at Alyssa's entry into the entertainment industry and boasted about it to everyone they knew. One day, unusually, Alyssa contacted me, proposing to repay our parents for raising us. Now that both of us have grown up, we should make things easier for Dad and Mom. Let's be filial together from now on. Alyssa spoke cheerfully in a very good mood. I thought, Alyssa, who used to only think about herself, has grown up. So, I was thinking about what Dad and Mom need, and I guess money would be best. How about sending about $4,000 a month? $4,000? I was surprised at the higher amount than I expected. I thought, modeling work must be doing well. If both of us send money, I'm sure Dad and Mom will be really happy. Let's start sending money from this month. I felt a slight discomfort in her words, but our parents had debts from raising us. As they wanted to repay those debts quickly, I agreed. However, I didn't have much spare money either. I first dipped into my savings to send the $4,000. My monthly salary was $3,000. Even if I kept my living expenses to $1,000, I was still short $2,000. So, on my days off, I started working as a security guard at a construction site. The daily pay was decent, but standing outside all day was hard labor. Working outdoors was hot in the summer and cold in the winter. There were many hardships. Nevertheless, the construction workers, surprisingly kind, would buy me juice or snacks, saying, "You're a hard worker even though you're young." I also tried to reduce food expenses by cooking as much as possible and saving every penny. But it still wasn't enough. Is there any way to increase my income? That's it. I'll get a certification, I decided, and spent the free time at home, cutting back on sleep to study for certification. Work and study, my days passed hectically. Amid this busyness, I couldn't respond immediately to the numerous calls from my parents. "I'm sorry, I've been too busy with work to answer the phone." "What's wrong?" The first thing I heard when I finally got through was, "You really are heartless. Don't you have any gratitude for the parents who raised you?" My father yelled irritably over the phone, with my mother's agreeing voice in the background. Yeah, that's right. I had no idea what they were talking about. The remittance is too little. Are you mocking us? What? Too little? I was even more bewildered by my father's words. Alyssa sends $4,000 every month, and you only send 50 cents? My father's voice grew louder. Startled, I responded quickly. That's not true. I send $4,000 every month properly. What are you talking about? It's Alyssa who sends $4,000. Alyssa is a model, so she earns a lot of money. Don't lie. While your sister is doing well, you. My father muttered complaints. Then, taking over the phone from him, my mother scolded me. Rose, just because you moved out doesn't mean you should be wasting money, right? Alyssa is working hard to make things easier for us, and you only think about yourself. Learn from your sister who sends $4,000 every month. She reprimanded me with a deep sigh of exasperation. I thought, why? I didn't understand the true meaning behind my parents' words, and felt so sad that I was at a loss for words. Previously, Alyssa had suggested, since it's weird that the remittance comes under the daughter's name, let's unify the sender's name to Nicole. I later learned that Nicole was Alyssa's stage name. Unbeknownst to me, she was using my name, Rose, for the 50 cents remittances. My parents believed that Alyssa was sending them $4,000. Trusting only her statements, and they said to me, don't bother sending money if it's just a small change like 50 cents. And abruptly hung up the phone. My parents, who wouldn't listen to me, and Alyssa, who deceived me, left me feeling a mix of sadness and frustration. I spent the whole night restless, unable to sleep, disturbed by the unfairness. I decided to discuss whether to continue sending money with my friend Hillary, who works at a consulting firm and is a successful career woman, known for her strong sense of justice and no-nonsense advice. Hillary has always been a reliable confidant. Fortunately, since her office was nearby, she took time out of her busy schedule to have lunch with me. It's rare for you to ask for advice. What's up? She looked at me with concern. Actually, I'm having trouble with my parents and sister. I hesitated a bit before starting to explain the situation over the phone. Hillary listened silently, nodding throughout, and then asked me about the reason for the remittances. Your parents are still in their 50s, right? They're young, do they really need so much money? She was also surprised at the monthly amount of $4,000. I was told by my sister that my parents have debts from our education expenses, and that we decided to make our parents' life easier and repay them by both of us sending money. Hillary looked skeptical and reassured me. But the university costs were mostly for Alyssa, right? If your father is an office employee, he should have a stable income. So you don't need to overexert yourself, Rose. It's strange that they suddenly need $4,000 every month, when they've been living normally up till now. And if they insist that you are sending only 50 cents, then stop remitting like they say. It won't cause any problems. Encouraged by Hillary's advice, I nodded in agreement. Rose, you're too good a person. Don't let your family take advantage of your kindness. Her words struck a chord. I thought, I wonder what kind of person I've been to my family. From now on, I need to stand by my own decisions. I made a promise to myself. 2 months after I stopped the remittances, my phone rang persistently. And it was Alyssa calling to demand remittances. Oh, Rebecca, I've been calling all morning. Answer your phone. And that's terrible of you. We promised to ease our parents' burdens, so why did you stop sending money? Alyssa ranted furiously. It's tough over here too. The electricity and water bills are overdue, and we don't know when they'll be cut off. She claimed that life had become difficult for our parents since the remittances stopped. However, I knew that the remittances were being used for Alyssa's vanity and our parents' wasteful spending. Fortunately, Hillary, who has many connections due to her job, casually inquired with a friend who knew Alyssa's friends and found out the truth. When I heard your story, I thought it was strange. It seems Alyssa has been living luxuriously. She was even seen buying loads of cosmetics at the department store downtown. It was absurd to sacrifice my well-being to support my family's irresponsible lifestyle. I know everything. I won't send any more money for such reasons. Dad is still working, so don't contact me ever again. I firmly refused. A week later, I heard from Alyssa. This time it was my parents calling. When they questioned Alyssa about the missing $4,000 remittances, she finally admitted that it was actually me who had been sending the money. I have no money, so don't rely on me, she revealed reluctantly. Alyssa had been telling our parents that she was earning well as a model. But in reality, she wasn't earning much and had become a burden to the talent agency. The only jobs she got were occasional gigs as a catalog model for a cheap mail order site, and even those paid little. Her lack of singing or dancing talent and charm meant she had no real skills to succeed in the entertainment industry. When this was revealed, my sister was scolded severely by our parents. We've scolded Alyssa harshly. You just keep sending us money like you used to. Of course, there was no apology for calling me a liar. As expected, you are reliable. Prepare and send the money for last month and this month as soon as you can. My parents, now demanding past remittances, showed their true greedy nature. Alyssa mentioned before that we have debts for our education expenses, right? Out of sudden curiosity, I asked. There's no debt. Your education was paid for with the money left by your grandparents. My father answered bluntly. It turned out that Alyssa's claim about having debts and needing remittances was a lie. Well, we need a bit of money for shopping. My mother responded insincerely. Knowing that my parents could live comfortably without remittances, I was certain there was no need to send them money. If Alyssa works properly, Dad's salary should be enough, I concluded. In response to my firm attitude, my father turned away in a huff, saying, You can be so cold to the parents who raised you. You're no daughter of mine anymore. Really, you're not family. My mother looked incredulous as my parents expressed their dissatisfaction. They continued, If that's the case, we'll cancel the savings account set up with the money your grandparents gave for your wedding expenses. You're a stranger to us now. Fine. Use that money however you want, Dad and Mom. But in return, leave me out of your lives. I decided I was done being manipulated by my parents and Alyssa. Alone, tears started to flow. I thought, how much has my family used me to their convenience? 2 months later, the intercom buzzed insistently. To my astonishment, it was my parents and Alyssa coming to my place. Filled with a desire to have nothing to do with them, I still went outside to hear them out. I was shocked to see the disheveled state of my parents and Alyssa. And they were equally surprised to see me. You seem different. Alyssa and my parents, puzzled by my improved appearance and finer attire, asked me why. Since our last encounter, I had diligently continued my studies and earned a small business consultant certification. With Hillary's introduction, I had changed jobs, which, along with the certification, had increased my income. I'm now a team leader at my new job. It's very busy every day, and since my home is far from work, I decided to move to a newly built apartment. I stated this matter-of-factly. Then, one after another, they made selfish remarks. If you can afford it, help us out. We're family, we should help each other when in trouble. Give us some money. Knowing I had money, my parents and Alyssa clamored for it. As I listened, Alyssa mentioned that modeling had become difficult. The modeling industry is tough. It's also ephemeral, she said, almost crying. The glamorous aura she once had was gone. Struggling in her work, Alyssa had been approached by another talent agency promising she could become an actress. She decided to take the chance with my parents' help, borrowing money to transfer to the new agency. A high membership fee was required, and my father had even paid his early retirement severance pay. But it turned out to be a scam. Once they paid, the agency's manager disappeared and all contact was lost. I was appalled at their carelessness for signing a contract without proper documentation. You shouldn't be here. You should go to the police right away, I urged as a loan shark appeared. Are you related to them? It seemed we had been followed. I learned that my parents and sister had borrowed a large sum from loan sharks, believing acting would bring in a fortune. Furthermore, Alyssa was venting her frustrations about her unsuccessful entertainment career at nightclubs. Her money was gone. My parents also gambled on casinos, hoping for a quick fortune, and ended up penniless. I felt no sympathy for their impulsive actions. When asked by the loan shark about our relationship, I stated firmly, "They are strangers. I have absolutely no connection with these people," and walked away. Later, my parents filed for bankruptcy to handle their debts. They had to sell their house and moved into a dilapidated apartment building over 60 years old. Both registered with a temporary staffing agency to scrape together a living. My father's next job was as a security guard at the construction site where I used to work. I hope we can get along from today. Oh my, a middle-aged man, huh? Nice to meet you. We used to have a young girl working hard here because she needed to send money home. Nowadays, parents making their daughters work security to send money home. Some parents are just monstrous. My father's face contorted. And Alyssa, having given up on modeling, dove into the nightlife world but was quickly fired from clubs and lounges due to her selfish nature, eventually eking out a living at a rundown snack bar. Her drinking increased, and her appearance drastically changed. Customers at the snack bar joked that her being a model was an urban legend. A model? Dream on. You look more like you belong in a wrestling ring than on a runway. I have cut ties with my parents and sister and am living freely. 5 years later, I attended Hillary's wedding. The ceremony was held at a chapel overlooking the sea in Hawaii. Blue sea, blue sky, an atmosphere of freedom. Next to Hillary was her husband, a man of good build and gentle demeanor, with a new life growing inside her. Hillary, who seemed focused solely on her career, had apparently fallen in love with a colleague and gotten married. I'm the type who gets what I want, but I cut off what I don't need. So, Rose, be true to yourself. Hillary laughed cheerfully, and her husband next to her chuckled softly. Don't abandon me. Hillary, thank you for everything. I wish you happiness always. I returned the sentiment with the brightest smile. Celebrating at Hillary's wedding, which had set me free. I expressed my gratitude once again. As the emotional ceremony neared its end, a man breathlessly arrived late. He seemed to be a friend of the bride and groom. Later, Hillary introduced me to this man named Samuel, nicknamed Sam by everyone. He was tall, healthy-looking, with a refreshing smile, and ran his own architectural firm. "I really wanted you to meet him," Hillary said with a mischievous grin. Caught up, Sam and I laughed together and found common ground, planning to go out for drinks together. It felt like roses were about to bloom. I had decided to pursue both love and my career, to walk my own path in life. Grandpa, are you watching over me from heaven? I will make my own flowers bloom.
I guess every story about family drama starts with everything was fine until. Well, my story isn't any different. Everything really was fine until I turned 11. I'm Tasha, and back then, I lived with my parents in a cozy 2-story house. It wasn't anything fancy, but it was home. Mom and Dad seemed happy enough, at least to my kid eyes. The divorce came as a surprise, even though it was peaceful. No screaming, no fighting over furniture, nothing like what my friend Jenny went through when her parents split up. Dad just moved out one day, taking his tools and clothes with him. He hugged me tight and said, "I'll always be here for you, princess." Mom handled it well at first. When Dad's alimony checks came in, she'd roll her eyes and mutter under her breath about how it wasn't enough, but that was about it. I spent weekends with Dad at his small apartment above the auto repair shop he was trying to get off the ground. The place always smelled like motor oil and coffee, but I loved it. Then, about a year after the divorce, Mom met Richard. He had 2 daughters, Sarah and Emma, both a couple years younger than me. When Mom told me about their engagement, her eyes lit up like Christmas lights. "Just think about it, honey," she gushed, holding my hands in hers. "You'll have sisters. We'll be a proper family again. Richard is such a wonderful man, and his girls are so sweet. You'll love having siblings." I remember nodding eagerly, caught up in her excitement. I'd always wanted sisters, and the way Mom described them made it sound like a fairy tale coming true. She spent hours talking about our future life together, painting pictures of family game nights and sister bonding sessions. The wedding was small but nice. I wore a pale blue dress and carried a basket of flowers. Sarah and Emma wore matching pink dresses and kept whispering and giggling together during the ceremony. I tried to catch their eyes, hoping they'd include me in their secret jokes, but they just turned away. When they moved in, I was so excited I could barely sleep the night before. I'd cleaned my room, made space in the bathroom cabinet for their things, and even put together welcome cards for each of them. Mom helped me arrange flowers in their rooms. "See? You're already being such a good sister," she said, kissing my forehead. If only I'd known then what was coming. Maybe I would have fought harder to keep things the way they were. Maybe I would have told Dad how I really felt about Mom remarrying. But I was 11, and I believed in fairy tales about happy blended families. It took exactly 3 days for my fairy tale to turn into a nightmare. On the 4th morning after they moved in, I woke up early as usual to get ready for school. But when I tried to go into the bathroom, the door was locked. "Just a minute," Sarah called out in a sing-song voice. That minute turned into 45. I kept knocking, telling them I needed to get ready for school, but all I heard was giggling and the hairdryer running. When they finally came out, both Sarah and Emma were perfectly groomed, wearing matching outfits. "Beauty takes time," Emma smirked as they passed me. "You should know that." "Oh wait, maybe you don't." I barely had time to brush my teeth before the school bus came. That became our new morning routine, them hogging the bathroom while I waited, usually ending up being late or rushing. But the bathroom was just the beginning. At dinner that night, I went to sit in my usual spot next to Mom, but Sarah had already taken it. When I opened my mouth to protest, Mom cut me off. "Tasha, honey, why don't you sit over there?" She pointed to the chair furthest from her, next to the edge of the table. "It's just a chair, don't make a fuss." I watched as Mom served Sarah and Emma first, cutting their meat into perfect pieces, asking if they wanted more juice, fussing over them like she used to fuss over me. Richard beamed at the scene, while I picked at my food in silence. Things got worse when Sarah spotted my collection of hair accessories, the ones Mom and I had bought together during our weekly shopping trips. "Oh my God, Emma, look at these," Sarah exclaimed, pulling out my favorite butterfly clips. They'd look so much better on us. Those are mine, I said, trying to take them back. Girls should share, Mom said firmly. Tasha, don't be greedy. Sarah and Emma are your sisters now. After that, Sarah and Emma started calling me Greedy Tasha whenever adults weren't listening. But that wasn't enough for them. My textbooks would mysteriously end up with torn pages. My clothes would get accidentally stained with nail polish. My homework would vanish, only to reappear crumpled in the trash. Every time I tried to tell Mom, she'd shake her head disapprovingly. Tasha, stop trying to get attention. I know this adjustment is hard, but making up stories about your sisters isn't the way to handle it. They're not my sisters, I finally snapped one day after finding my favorite sweater with a huge hole in it. That earned me a lecture from both Mom and Richard about family and gratitude. But the final blow came a week later when Mom announced she was reorganizing the bedrooms. Sarah and Emma need more space for their things, she explained, not quite meeting my eyes. Your room has better closets, so they'll take that one. We've already moved your stuff to the small room next to the laundry. The small room was basically a glorified closet with a window. It barely fit my bed and dresser. When I saw all my things crammed into that tiny space, something inside me broke a little. This wasn't just about a room, it was about my place in this family, or rather, my lack of one. Richard wasn't content just letting his daughters torment me, he had to join in too. Any little thing I did wrong became proof that I was a difficult child. If I was quiet, I was sulking. If I spoke up, I was being disruptive. I couldn't win. Just like your father, he'd say, shaking his head whenever I didn't meet his impossible standards. Always causing problems. The apple doesn't fall far from the tree, does it? The funny thing was, Dad was actually doing pretty well with his auto repair business. He specialized in luxury cars, and while it was tough at first, he was slowly building a solid reputation. I never told Richard this, though. Let him think what he wanted. My weekends with Dad became my lifeline. We'd order pizza, watch old movies, and he'd tell me stories about the fancy cars he was working on. Sometimes I'd sit in his office while he did paperwork, just enjoying the peaceful atmosphere. How are things at home, Princess? He'd ask occasionally, and I'd always say fine. He had enough on his plate, working long hours to get his business off the ground. The last thing he needed was to worry about me too. The years crawled by. I threw myself into my studies, spending as much time as possible at the library or with friends. Anything to avoid being home. Before I knew it, high school graduation was approaching. I'd applied to several colleges. I got acceptance letters from most of them. I was over the moon, finally, a chance to get away, to start fresh. The day after graduation, I couldn't contain my excitement anymore. We were all sitting at dinner, and I decided to share my news. I got accepted to several colleges, I announced, pulling out the acceptance letters. Even got offered some partial scholarships. I really like the business program at. Richard's laugh cut through my words like a knife. Not a genuine laugh, one of those mocking ones that makes your stomach sink. College? He sneered. And who exactly is going to pay for that? Your loser father? The guy who can barely keep his little garage afloat? I stared at him, the letters suddenly feeling heavy in my hands. I have scholarships, and I can get loans. Don't be ridiculous, he interrupted. We're not co-signing any loans for you. We're saving our money for Sarah and Emma's education. I turned to Mom, desperately hoping she'd stand up for me, defend me, be my mother for once. She just looked down at her plate. Richard's right, honey, she said softly. We need to think about the girl's future. Something inside me snapped. All the hurt, all the rejection, all the years of being pushed aside, it all came pouring out at once. "You haven't paid any attention to me in years," I shouted, pushing back from the table. "All you care about is pleasing your precious husband and his perfect daughters. When's the last time you even asked how I was doing? When's the last time you acted like my mother instead of their stepmother?" The silence that followed was deafening. Then came the sharp crack of skin against skin. It took me a moment to realize what had happened, that my mother, my own mother, had slapped me across the face. My cheek stung, but what hurt more was seeing Sarah and Emma's expressions. They were actually smiling, clearly enjoying the show. Richard sat there with a satisfied smirk, like he'd been waiting for this moment. I touched my cheek, feeling the heat radiating from where her hand had struck. Mom just stood there, her hand still raised, her face a mixture of anger and something else. Shock? I didn't stick around to find out. I ran to my tiny room and started throwing things into my suitcase. Clothes, photos, my few remaining precious possessions that Sarah and Emma hadn't ruined. I could hear movement in the house, but no one came to check on me. No one tried to stop me. No one said they were sorry. I made it about a block before the adrenaline wore off and reality hit me. I was 18, with no money, no plan, and nowhere to go. My hands were shaking as I pulled out my phone and called Dad. "Hey princess, what's up?" His cheerful voice almost made me break down right there. Can you come get me?" I managed to say, trying to keep my voice steady. "Of course. Where are you?" 15 minutes later, a sleek black Mercedes pulled up beside me. For a moment, I thought I'd given him the wrong street. There was no way this was my dad's car. But there he was, grinning through the open window. "Like my new ride?" he asked as he got out to help me with my suitcase. "This is yours?" I stared at him in disbelief. I thought it was a customer's car. He laughed, that warm, familiar laugh I'd grown up with. "Nope, all mine. Bought it last week. Business has been good." Then he noticed my suitcase, and his expression changed. "Tasha, what's going on? Why are you out here with a suitcase?" The whole story came pouring out, the college acceptances, Richard's mockery, Mom's betrayal, the slap. Dad's face grew darker with each word. By the end, he was gripping the steering wheel so tight, his knuckles were white. "I'm going over there right now," he growled, starting to turn the car around. "No, Dad, please don't," I grabbed his arm. "It's not worth it. I just want to leave." He looked at me for a long moment, then nodded. "You're right. Let's go home." Over lunch at his place, he'd learned to cook pretty decent pasta over the years. Dad dropped another bombshell. "Remember that fleet contract I was bidding on? With the luxury car rental company?" He was trying to act casual, but I could see him practically bouncing with excitement. "Well, I got it. Exclusive maintenance contract for their entire fleet. The business is really taking off." I was genuinely happy for him, but I must have looked a bit dejected thinking about my own situation, because he quickly added, "And you know what else? I've been saving money for years, putting aside whatever I could for your college fund. It's not enough for an Ivy League school, but combined with your scholarships." I nearly choked on my pasta. You've been saving for my college?" He reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "Of course I have, princess. Did you really think I'd let Richard be right about me?" For the first time that day, I started crying, but these were happy tears. All those years I'd spent protecting Dad from my problems, and here he'd been quietly planning for my future the whole time. I decided to keep my college plans secret from Mom and her perfect family. Let them think they'd won. I spent that summer living with Dad and working at the Sweet Bean Cafe downtown to save up some extra money. Then one afternoon, the bell above the door chimed, and in walked Sarah and Emma, dressed like they were heading to a fashion show instead of a coffee shop. They settled into a booth in my section, of course they did, and smirked as I approached with my notepad. Well, Sarah drawled, loud enough for nearby customers to hear. Looks like someone found their true calling. Emma snickered. Yeah, we just wanted to see how the other half lives, before we head off to college in the fall. Dad's already picked out the perfect schools for us. Can I take your order? I kept my voice professional, fighting back a smile. If they only knew. Oh, you'll probably still be taking orders when we graduate, Sarah continued, examining her manicured nails. But don't worry, maybe we'll leave you nice tips when we visit home from college. I just smiled and wrote down their complicated, half-CAF, extra hot drink orders. Let them have their moment, I knew where I was headed. That fall, I started college in the neighboring state. I threw myself into my business classes, made new friends, and started building a life that had nothing to do with my past. Mom never called to apologize for the slap, or for anything else. I didn't call her either. Dad visited whenever he could, and we talked almost every day. 4 years flew by. I graduated with honors and landed a job at a marketing firm in the same city as my college. Starting salary wasn't huge, but it was enough to rent a small apartment and live comfortably. I worked hard, stayed late, took on extra projects. My bosses noticed. The promotions started coming. First junior manager, then senior manager, then team leader. Each one came with a nice bump in pay. I was able to start saving serious money for the first time in my life. Then one day, Dad showed up at my apartment with a massive grin on his face. His business had expanded to 3 locations, and he'd just signed contracts with 2 more luxury car rental companies. I want you to have this, he said, pulling out a cashier's check. The amount made me dizzy. It's for a down payment on your own place. You've worked so hard, princess. You deserve this. 2 months later, I was moving into my own apartment, not rented, owned. More raises came. More promotions. I started thinking about buying a house, something with a garden maybe, in one of those quiet neighborhoods outside the city. Then one evening, my phone rang. Unknown number. Tasha? The voice was hesitant, familiar in a way that made my stomach clench. It's Mom. I think it's time we talked. I want to try to fix things between us. Okay, I heard myself say. Let's talk. We agreed to meet at a small cafe downtown, neutral territory. When Mom walked in, I almost didn't recognize her. She looked older, tired, nothing like the competent woman who had chosen her new family over me years ago. You look wonderful, she said, sliding into the seat across from me. Her hands were shaking slightly as she arranged her napkin. We made awkward small talk about the weather and my job until the waitress brought our coffee. Then Mom took a deep breath and the real story came out. I left Richard, she said, staring into her cup. Or rather, he left me. After we mortgaged the house to pay for the girls' college. I waited, letting her continue at her own pace. They promised they'd help with the payments once they graduated. She laughed bitterly. But when the time came, they had excuses. Always excuses. The job market was tough, they needed to focus on their careers, they had their own expenses. She wiped her eyes with a trembling hand. We lost the house. All those years of payments, gone. And Richard, he just packed up and moved in with Sarah. Said he couldn't handle the financial stress anymore. Mom, I started, but she held up her hand. Please, let me finish. I was wrong, Tasha. I chose them over you. I let them hurt you. I hurt you. And I am so sorry. The tears in her eyes were real. The tremor in her voice was real. And despite everything, despite all the years of pain and rejection, I found myself reaching across the table to take her hand. I forgive you, I said softly, surprising myself with how much I meant it. The next few days, I couldn't stop thinking about our conversation. About Mom, alone and homeless after giving everything to people who had given nothing back. It felt like karma, in a way, but it didn't make me happy. Instead, I felt a strange mix of sadness and opportunity, a chance to be the bigger person. I called her on a Wednesday evening. I'd been thinking about buying a house, I said after we exchanged hellos. Something in the old neighborhood, with a garden maybe. It would be too big for just me, but maybe you'd like to live there? I took a week off work and flew home to house hunt. Found a beautiful place just outside town, nothing fancy, but solid and welcoming, with a wraparound porch and mature trees in the yard. Mom cried when she saw it. When Dad heard about my decision, I expected him to be upset. Instead, he surprised me. You've got a bigger heart than most, princess, he said, hugging me tight. I'm proud of you. The next few months fell into a pleasant routine. I'd fly in for weekend visits, spend time with Dad first, then head over to the new house to see Mom. We were rebuilding our relationship slowly but surely. She seemed happier, more like the Mom I remembered from childhood. During one visit, I noticed some unfamiliar things in the house, men's boots by the door, a jacket I didn't recognize hanging in the hallway. Oh, just a friend visiting, Mom said quickly when I asked. You know how it is. I didn't think much of it at the time. Maybe I should have. The call came on a Tuesday morning. I was just settling into work when my phone lit up with Aunt Carol's number. Tasha, honey, she said, her voice hesitant. There's something you need to know. It's about your mother. Well, Richard's living in the house. Him and his daughters. They moved in months ago. That's impossible, I said. I was just there 2 weeks ago. It was just Mom. Because she makes them leave before you visit, Aunt Carol said gently. They clear out every time you're scheduled to come. I found out from Marie next door. She's been watching them come and go for months now. Suddenly, those friends' belongings I'd seen made terrible sense. The boots, the jacket. The way Mom had brushed off my questions. I thanked her, hung up, and booked the first flight home. No warning, no calls to Mom. Just grabbed my laptop, I could work remotely, and headed to the airport. It was Wednesday afternoon when I pulled up to the house in my rental car. Richard's old pickup was in the driveway, the same one he'd had all those years ago. My key turned smoothly in the lock. The scene in the kitchen could have been pulled straight from my teenage years. Mom at the stove, wearing her favorite apron, fussing over a pot of something that smelled like Richard's favorite beef stew. Sarah and Emma at the kitchen table, looking exactly like their old entitled selves, just older. Richard in his usual chair, reading the newspaper. Mom saw me first. The wooden spoon she was holding clattered to the floor. Tasha, her face went white. I wasn't expecting you until Saturday. Clearly, I said, my voice surprisingly steady. What are they doing here? We live here now, Sarah announced with a smirk. Mom invited us. She realized family should stick together. Family? I turned to Mom, who was nervously wiping her hands on her apron. After everything they did to you? After they cost you your house? They apologized, Mom said weakly. They're trying to make things right. Richard's changed, the girls have changed. Get them out, I cut her off. Now. This is my house, and I want them gone. No. Mom straightened up, and I saw that familiar stubborn look cross her face. I love them, and I want them here. Love them? I couldn't believe what I was hearing. They drove you into debt. They cost you your house. Have you forgotten how they treated me? How they bullied me every single day? How they destroyed my things, stole my room, made my life hell? That was years ago. Mom waved her hand dismissively. They were just children then. And what about now? I demanded. They used you for college money and abandoned you. Richard left you when things got tough. How can you just forgive that? Because they're family, Mom insisted, her chin lifting stubbornly. They made mistakes, but they're sorry now. Sarah and Emma exchanged smug looks. Richard just sat there with that same self-satisfied smile I remembered from my childhood. Fine, I said, my voice ice cold. Then I'm giving you a choice, Mom. Right now, them or me. The silence that followed seemed to stretch forever. I watched Mom's face, searching for any sign of the mother I used to know, the one who used to braid my hair and kiss my scraped knees and tell me I could be anything I wanted to be. I choose them, she said finally. We're happy together, Tasha. Why can't you just accept that? Something inside me hardened permanently. You have 2 days to get out of my house. All of you. You can't do this. Mom's voice rose to a shriek. I'm your mother. You can't throw me out. Watch me. I turned and walked out, their voices following me down the driveway. 2 days later, I returned. Nothing had changed. Their cars were still in the driveway, and when I walked in, they were all sitting in the living room like they owned the place. I told you to leave, I said. Mom actually laughed. And I told you, you can't throw me out. I'm your mother. Fine. I pulled out my phone and dialed 911. Then I'll let the police explain it to you. You wouldn't dare. Richard started to rise from his chair. Hello? Yes, I need assistance removing unauthorized occupants from my property. I stated my address clearly, maintaining eye contact with Mom the whole time. What followed was ugly. The police arrived within minutes. Mom screamed and cried as the officers explained that yes, I could evict them, and no, she had no legal right to stay. Richard turned purple with rage, calling me every name he could think of. Sarah and Emma joined in, their true colors showing through their designer clothes and fake smiles. You ungrateful bitch, Mom shrieked as the police escorted them out. After everything I've done for you. Everything you've done for me? I watched them load their belongings into their cars. Name one thing, Mom. Just one thing you've done for me since the day you married him. She had no answer for that. Aunt Carol keeps me updated, though I never ask. They're living in a small apartment across town, struggling to make rent. Richard still can't hold down a job. Sarah and Emma never visit, too busy with their own lives to care about the mother who sacrificed everything for them. Sometimes Mom calls late at night, but I never answer. The house sits empty most of the time. I'm thinking about selling it, maybe buying something closer to the city where I live now. Something smaller, cozier. Something that doesn't hold any echoes of the past.
And he loves me. That's what matters, not your opinion on my health. The conversation ended soon after, but the damage was done. The rift between us grew wider, deeper. Alex tried to mediate, but his attempts only made things worse. One evening, as we sat quietly in our living room, he broached the subject. Melly, I spoke to Mom. She's really upset. She thinks you're avoiding her. I let out a bitter laugh. Avoiding her? She's been nothing but harsh and judgmental since day one. What does she expect? Alex ran a hand through his hair, looking exasperated. She's my mom, Melly. I can't just ignore her. Can't you two try to work things out? I looked at him, feeling a mix of anger and sadness. Alex, it's not about working it out. It's about respect. She doesn't respect me, and I don't know if I can keep pretending it doesn't hurt. The wedding day was supposed to be the happiest day of my life, and it was, at least until the reception. Everything was perfect, the ceremony, the vows, Alex looking at me like I was the only one in the room. But then, at the reception, everything changed. I remember holding a glass of wine, the same wine everyone else was drinking. It tasted a bit off, but I figured it was just nerves. I took a sip, and that's the last thing I remember before waking up in a stark white hospital room, confused and groggy. I tried to sit up, and that's when I heard them, Alex and his mom, just outside my room. Mrs. Donovan's voice was sharp. See what I mean, Alex? She can't even handle a simple toast. She's too weak, too fragile for our family. I felt a pang of hurt, but I was too weak to respond. Alex's voice, full of worry, cut through. Mom, stop it. This isn't the time. We don't even know what happened. I wanted to shout, to tell them I was okay. That I wasn't weak, but my voice was a mere whisper. Then the door opened and a doctor walked in, a serious look on his face. Mrs. Donovan, he said, addressing me, you gave us quite a scare. We found traces of a sedative in your system. Did you take anything before the ceremony? I shook my head weakly. No, nothing. Just the wine. The doctor frowned. But no one else had this reaction. It's very unusual. Alex stepped in, his face etched with concern. Doctor, are you saying someone might have tampered with her drink? The doctor hesitated. It's a possibility we can't ignore. We'll need to run some more tests. I lay there stunned. Someone had drugged me on my wedding day. But who and why? As the doctor left to arrange the tests, Alex came to my side, taking my hand. Melly, I'm so sorry. I can't believe this is happening. I tried to smile, to reassure him, but my mind was racing. The only thing I could taste was the bitterness of the wine and Mrs. Donovan's harsh words echoing in my head. That night in the hospital, I couldn't sleep. The realization that someone might have deliberately hurt me was terrifying, and the worst part was not knowing who or why. I looked over at Alex, asleep in the chair next to my bed, and felt a wave of sadness. Our wedding day was supposed to be about us, our love. Instead, it ended with me in a hospital bed, surrounded by suspicion and fear. Back home from the hospital, I was a bundle of nerves. The thought that someone had drugged me at my own wedding was like a dark cloud hanging over me. And deep down, I had a gnawing suspicion about who it might be. One evening, I couldn't hold it in any longer. Alex and I were sitting in the living room, the TV playing some show neither of us was watching. I turned to him, my voice shaky. Alex, I need to talk to you about something serious. He muted the TV, looking concerned. What's up, Melly? I took a deep breath. I've been thinking about what happened at the wedding, and I can't shake off the feeling that your mom might have had something to do with it. Alex's face changed instantly. What, Melly? That's crazy talk. Why would you even think that? I could feel my frustration mounting. Think about it, Alex. All those comments, the way she's always on my case, and then I suddenly fall ill after drinking wine that tasted odd. It's not that far-fetched. Alex stood up, passing the room. Melly, you're talking about my mom. She can be tough, sure, but she wouldn't do something like that. You're letting your imagination run wild. I stood up too, my voice raising. Am I Alex? Or have you just been turning a blind eye to all the things she's said and done? Can't you see she doesn't like me? He stopped pacing, looking pained. Melly, this is serious. Accusing someone of drugging you, that's a big deal. You can't just throw around accusations without proof. I felt tears prick my eyes. I thought you'd at least consider what I'm saying, but it seems like you'll always take her side. Alex sighed, running a hand through his hair. It's not about taking sides, Melly. It's about being rational. We can't accuse people based on a hunch. I felt a mix of anger and disappointment. So what am I supposed to do? Just forget it happened. He came over, trying to put his arm around me, but I stepped back. We need to think this through, Melly. Maybe talk to the police again, see if they found anything new. I nodded, though I felt far from convinced. Fine, we'll talk to them. But Alex, if it turns out I'm right, I don't know what I'll do. That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. My mind kept going back to Mrs. Donovan. Her words, her looks. The doubt and fear were like poison, and I knew I had to find the truth, no matter how painful it might be. A couple of weeks after the hospital incident, we were invited to another family gathering at Mrs. Donovan's house. I was hesitant to go, but Alex insisted it would be good for us to show a united front. As we walked in, the atmosphere was tense. I could feel eyes on me, whispering under their breath. Mrs. Donovan greeted us with a smile. "Melly, dear, so glad you could make it," she said, her voice dripping with something that didn't quite sound like sincerity. I forced a smile back. "Thank you for having us, Mrs. Donovan." Dinner was served, and I noticed Mrs. Donovan made a point of bringing me a separate dish. "I made this especially for you, Melly, considering your delicate condition." Her emphasis on delicate didn't go unnoticed. I eyed the dish wearily. It looked normal, but after the wedding, I couldn't be sure. Alex, oblivious to my discomfort, started eating his meal. I pushed the food around my plate, my appetite gone. Mrs. Donovan watched me, a hint of a smirk on her face. "Not hungry, Melly. I made it just for you." I looked up, meeting her gaze. "I'm just not feeling all that well, Mrs. Donovan, but thank you." The room was filled with murmurs and side glances. I could feel the weight of everyone's eyes on me, judging, questioning. Alex, noticing my discomfort, leaned in. "You okay?" I nodded, but my mind was racing. What if she had done something to the food again? I couldn't take any chances. I whispered to Alex, "Can we switch plates? I'm not comfortable eating this." He looked confused but obliged, swapping our plates. As he reached for a bite of my food, Mrs. Donovan's hand shot out, stopping him. "No, Alex, don't," she exclaimed, her voice laced with panic. The room went silent, everyone's eyes now on her. Alex looked up, startled. "Mom, what's wrong?" Mrs. Donovan's face had lost all color. She stammered, looking for an excuse. "It's just, that dish is specially made for Melly. It's not to everyone's taste." I stared at her, my suspicions growing stronger. "Why not, Mrs. Donovan? What's in it that's so special?" She fumbled for words, her usual composure slipping away. It's just a special recipe." The tension in the room was palpable. Alex looked between his mother and me, confusion turning to realization. "Mom, what did you do?" Mrs. Donovan was silent, her eyes darting around the room. I knew then, without a doubt, that my suspicions were right. There was something in that food, something she didn't want Alex to eat. Following the incident with the plates, I could feel everyone's eyes on us, on Mrs. Donovan, who looked like she was caught in a trap. Alex, his face a mix of anger and disbelief, turned to his mother. "Mom, what's going on? Why did you freak out about me eating Melly's food?" Mrs. Donovan was fumbling for words, her usual poise nowhere to be seen. "It's nothing, just, it was made for Melly, not for you." I couldn't hold back anymore. "That's not good enough, Mrs. Donovan. You've been against me from the start. What did you put in my food?" The room erupted into murmurs. Mrs. Donovan's eyes darted around, looking for an escape. "I didn't put anything in your food, Melly. This is ridiculous." I stood up, my hands trembling. "It's not ridiculous. Ever since I started coming to these dinners, I felt sick. And then the wedding. Someone drugged my drink. And now this. It's too much of a coincidence." Alex stood up too, his voice firm. "Mom, if you did something to Melly's food, you need to tell us now. This is serious." Mrs. Donovan's face crumpled. I just wanted to protect you, Alex. She's not right for you. She's weak, sickly." I felt a surge of anger. Protect him by making me sick? By drugging me? The guests were now openly staring, the air thick with accusation and shock. Alex's uncle, who had been silent until now, spoke up. "This is a serious accusation, Melly. Do you have any proof?" I pointed to my plate. "I'm calling the police, and they will give the food prepared by Mrs. Donovan for examination." And then Mrs. Donovan burst into tears. "I just wanted the best for my son. I thought if she was out of the picture, he'd find someone better, someone healthier." The confession hung in the air, heavy and damning. Alex looked at his mother, his expression one of utter betrayal. "You did this to Melly, my wife." I felt a mix of relief and despair. Relief that the truth was out, but despair at the cost. My relationship with Alex, our place in his family, everything was in shambles. The rest of the evening was a haze. There were arguments, people taking sides, some in disbelief, others in anger. Alex and I left early, the weight of what had happened bearing down on us as we drove home. Neither of us spoke. The silence was oppressive, filled with unasked questions and spoken fears. What did this mean for us? For our future? The woman who was supposed to be my family had betrayed me in the worst way, and the fallout was something neither Alex nor I were prepared to handle. That night, as I lay in bed, the events of the evening replayed in my mind. Mrs. Donovan's confession, the look of shock on Alex's face, the whispers of the guests. The confrontation had brought the truth to light, but it had also opened a wound that I wasn't sure could ever fully heal. One evening, as Alex and I sat together, the silence between us felt particularly profound. Breaking the stillness, I turned to Alex. "We need to talk about what's next, about the police." He looked at me, his expression solemn yet supportive. "I've been thinking about that too. It's your decision, Melly. I'll back you up, whatever you choose." I mulled over the thought, feeling the weight of the decision on my shoulders. It's just, going to the police feels like opening a Pandora's box. It's not just about exposing what happened. It's about airing family issues in public. He nodded understandingly. "I know it's hard, but remember, you're the one who's been wronged. If you want to pursue this legally, I'm with you." After a pause, I let out a deep breath. "No, I don't think I want to go down that road, but there's something else I've decided." I hesitated, gathering my courage. "I can't see your mother again, Alex. After everything, I can't." Alex's reaction was quiet, contemplative. "I understand, and honestly, I feel the same. After what she did, I can't just carry on as if nothing's happened. I won't see her either." His words were a relief, a validation of my feelings. "It's going to be hard, Alex. She's your mother." He squeezed my hand, firm and reassuring. "I know, but what she did, it's unforgivable. Our relationship, our marriage, comes first." In the days that followed, we both stood by our decision. It was a difficult period, adjusting to this new reality where Mrs. Donovan was no longer a part of our lives. There were moments of doubt, of questioning whether we were too harsh, but we supported each other through them. We started focusing more on ourselves, on rebuilding and strengthening our bond. We made plans for the future, small things to look forward to, like weekend getaways and quiet evenings together. As we moved forward, I realized that this ordeal, as painful as it was, had brought us closer. We had faced a challenge together, one that tested the very foundation of our relationship, and had come out stronger.